Welcome to Rudolph Valentino Connections. This video is a little bit late. I just finished the post a couple of days ago. It's the second in the series I am doing on Moran of the Lady Letty. This is part 2, and it's called Moran of the Lady Letty, Part 2, a look at the 1922 Valentino Dalton film versus the novel, The Big Differences. As I said, this was delayed a little bit because over the last few weeks there have been some issues, computer issues, of course, and then, of course, my aunt, who died a couple of weeks ago, I was in contact with her every day. She was born 2 days after Rudolph Valentino died and was with me at the start of this project. So she shared a lot of what I was doing, and I really missed talking to her about it. And then on Sunday, April 10th, that was the anniversary of my mother's 100th birthday, and she was born in the middle of the time when Valentino was filming Blood and Sand. So this post comes in the middle of all that connection, if you want to say it, call that. Now, starting with this overview, this is a bit of a scholarly post, because I just wanted to see what the original novel was. It's available, of course, at archive.org, and I use that edition, which I have a link to, and compare it to the video, the film on YouTube, which is the Flicker Alley release, but the introduction was delivered by the late Robert Osborne. It was on TCM, their version. Now, to start with this post, I'll go into the little bit of the background about the novel. But before I get to that, Monty M. Catterjohn, who had adapted Edith Hull's The Sheik for the screen, was also called in to adapt a seafaring novel for Rudolph Valentino's next film. He had toned down The Sheik and also made some minor storyline changes and omissions. But when he adapted the book to the screen, Frank Norris's Moran of the Lady Letty, he not only softened the tone of the story, but he also made major deletions and other changes to the story. And it's quite shocking in a way what he did. I mean, it was masterful in terms of being a film, but it really, really changed the novel quite a bit. Benjamin Franklin Norris was born in 1870 and died in 1902. He began writing Moran of the Lady Letty as a weekly serial, starting in late 1897. His first major work, McTeague, had already been written, but it wasn't published until 1899. So Moran made the screen in 1922, and McTeague got to the screen in 1924 under the direction of Erich von Stroheim under the title of Greed. It's on YouTube. It's a masterpiece, and if you haven't seen it, you really must see it. Now, ironically, Frank Norris died at the age of 32 in 1902 following an operation for appendicitis. Ironically, because Rudolph Valentino, as a result of his surgery for perforated ulcers, had his inflamed appendix removed, and of course, he passed away after that surgery as well. In the novel, Frank Norris is clear about who the main character is. It's Moran. And Moran is, quote, the only excuse for the yarn. In fact, he thought the other characters were all nits. My game was to make them all nits and bring Moran out in full value. Now, in the novel, the main male lead is Ross Wilbur versus, in the film, Ramon Loreto. Obviously, the name changed to accommodate Rudolph Valentino's Latin appearance. As the title card shows us and tells us, Ramon Loreto has the dash and fire inherited from his Spanish ancestors, whereas in the novel, when Ross Wilbur leaves the afternoon pink tea held for Josie Herrick, he is, quote, settling his hat gingerly upon his hair so as not to disturb the parting. Dorothy Dalton, of course, was given the featured role of Moran in the film. She was already very well established. having worked in stock theater and the vaudeville circuits from 1910 until Thomas Ince convinced her to make films starting in the summer of 1915. She actually was a top-billed star starting very early in her career, and by 1921, she had already appeared in nearly 50 films. Now, Dalton was considered to be a vivacious beauty in Hollywood, and she was known for her dimples. Now, in an effort to create the image of a young woman molded by life at sea, Dalton cut her hair in a bob style. However, her appearance was so different from the book, where it was emphasized over and over again how masculine Moran really was. Now, first of all, her appearance is a far cry from Moran's in terms of being far shorter in height than Valentino's character. And also, over and over again, the masculinity is just almost overwhelming in the description. And here I have a few passages that are from the book, and they talk about Moran's physical attributes. For example, she was not pretty. She was too tall for that, quite as tall as Wilbur himself, and her skeleton was too massive. Her face was red. Her hands were red and hard, and even beneath the coarse sleeve of the oilskin coat, one could infer that the biceps and the deltoids were large and powerful. Her enormous mane of rye-colored hair was braided into long strands near to the thickness of a man's arm. Okay, and her arms, big and white and tattooed in sailor fashion, thick, muscular neck, massive jaw. Her hair, her heavy yellow hair that lay over her shoulder and breast, coiling and looping in her lap. Obviously, Dorothy Dalton's bobbed hair didn't quite measure up to the description of Moran in the novel. She was not exactly as Frank Norris had described her. There are many changes to the plot of the novel, in fact, additions to the story in the film. And I've created a series of sections or subsections in the blog to keep things in order and easy to get through. And right here, I'm showing you some of the scenes early in the film that are just not in the novel. Now, the reason why these scenes are not in the novel is because Kitchell is dead. By the end of chapter 4, Kitchell has gone down with the Lady Letty in a squall. And the quotation at the end there is, "Of the Lady Letty and the drunken beachcombing captain, not a trace remained. Kitchell had gone down with his prize." So the villainous Kitchell is dead by the end of chapter 4, but he lives on in the film. Now, some of the dialogue is taken from missing pieces of the book and are placed in scenes in the film, but Kitchell is a goner early in the novel. What's missing from the film is basically about 1/3 of the book, 4 chapters. And in this part of the story, the action descends into violence. There are actions by Moran that mirror some of the worst aspects of Kitchell, and the author displays very ugly racist descriptions of Chinese characters. In terms of the plot, instead of seeing Kitchell at Magdalena Bay with Poncho, the gang, we see Moran and Wilbur navigating to the bay, and they spot a Chinese junk. And the members of that crew have spotted a dead whale, and they approach Moran and Wilbur for assistance in harvesting the whale, helping to take out whatever they can get from this carcass. And there's a deal struck, and what happens later on is very unsettling. But in terms of the actual description of the Chinese characters, it's done from Wilbur's point of view. He calls them the lowest type of men he'd ever seen. They were like apes. They were simian. And at one point he says that they were like unclean monkeys, and they made him sick to his stomach. They were unlike any Chinaman he'd ever seen, hideous to a degree that he'd imagined impossible in a human being. Well, after the harvesting of the whale and the reneging on the deal, Moran really wants to take all of the spoils. And of course, the battles that ensue, finally, they capture Hoang, and she actually tortures this leader of the junk. She wraps a rope around his jaw and then takes a file and moves it across the surface of his teeth. And Wilbur is so upset by this that he actually has to turn away, and he vomits. But the story goes on, and it gets worse. The story gets worse because as Moran leads her crew back onto the beach to chase down the rest of the Chinese junk's crew, there's, of course, more fighting. And at this point, she lapses back into Viking mode. And it gets so wild that she begins to fight Wilbur. And he's excited by all this combat, and they're fighting together, and it's almost like it's a very deadly, serious combat at this point. Now, this is equivalent of the scene we see in the film, where there's a little light pummeling, and it's not really a big fight. But here, the story really goes off the rails in the novel here, and this is where the critics really find it to be sort of not very understandable at all. Wilbur actually pins Moran down, plants a knee on her chest, and suddenly Moran gave up, relaxing in his grasp all in a second, and to his great surprise, suddenly smiled. Now, she has not shown any signs of affection towards Wilbur up until this point, and then she declares, "I'm as weak as a kitten," and admits that he has conquered her, and shaking him by the shoulder, confesses, "And mate, you know I love you for it." Now, I've included a slideshow where you can see this whole battle go on and this transformation, which, frankly, in the film seems to make a lot more sense. I mean, it's not as violent. There have been hints along the way. Moran is not a Viking in the film. So in this case, I would say that the film is much better than what happens in the novel. Now, at this point in the novel, after all the fighting is done with the Chinese beachcombers, there's a scene that's parallel in the film when Ramon, and in this case Wilbur, goes back to society. Now, in the film, Valentino is neatly turned out and presentable in his pea coat. But, of course, in the novel, it's not quite the same. When he arrives at the ball, at the assembly, full of people in evening dress, obviously, he is a figure that is unhandsome and unkempt beyond description. His hair was long and hanging over his eyes. A thick, uncared-for beard concealed the mouth and chin. The tan and weather beatings of nearly half a year in the tropics were spread over his face. He had a partly healed scar, disfigured one temple and cheekbone. He had dirty nails, uncared for. So, you know, the description in the novel is totally different than a very presentable and neat Rudolph Valentino in the film. Now, but one has to wonder, with Rudolph Valentino's penchant for enjoying putting on makeup and costume, if he would have relished making himself up to look like Wilbur coming back in such an unkempt manner. But of course, in the film, he's utterly presentable, even though he looks a little bit scruffy compared to what he would be in the novel. Nah, he was handsome and well presented. And now we come to the drastically different endings between the book and the film. In the novel, Wilbur begins to have doubts. As they approach San Francisco, he can sense that Moran is feeling imprisoned and confined. He points out some of the sights on the shore, and she says, "And people can live there? Good heavens, why not rabbit burrows? And be done with it, mate. How soon can we be out to sea again? I hate this place." He goes to shore for the first time in the novel, without her, of course, and he stops at a lifeboat station where he meets Captain Hodgson, who's on duty, who's already heard about the arrival of the boat, and he actually chats with Wilbur and says, "I hear you've got a strapping fine girl aboard with you. Where did you fall in with her?" And he winks and he grins, and at that point, Wilbur started as though struck. But the words had touched off in his brain a veritable mine of conjecture. Moran in Magdalena Bay was consistent, congruous, and fitted into her environment. But how? How was Wilbur to explain her to San Francisco? And how could his behavior seem else than ridiculous to the men of his club and to the women whose dinner invitations he was wont to receive? So, he needed to walk. Like most men, Wilbur had to walk when he was thinking hard. He sent the dory back to the schooner with word to Moran that he would walk around the beach and return in an hour or two. But all memories of the experience he has had came rushing back as he walked. Now, meanwhile, in the film, we find that Moran has no aversion to civilization. We already know this. We've seen her on the docks of Norway and San Francisco. She's very happy to be in quote-unquote civilization, but she does decide to stay back as Ramon goes on shore. And she does wait with some nervousness as she waits for his return. Now, at this point, of course, in the film, Kitchell is still alive, hiding below deck. And he finds Moran sitting with her head down with apprehension, and he begins to attack her. Luckily, Ramon has just returned to the ship, and he hears Moran screaming for help. The title card dialogue is only slightly different from the words in the novel, but the words set in a totally different context. "Help, mate! Oh, mate, where are you?" Ramon rushes down below deck, confronts Kitchell. The fight begins. Like a true damsel in distress, Moran hangs back to watch and then follows as the fight moves back up to the deck and then up into the ship's rigging. Now, as the fight reaches its final stages, Moran seems to think that it is Ramon who has ultimately fallen into the water. She is crestfallen, and of course, though, she soon finds out that Ramon has prevailed, and Moran tells him, "Oh, mate, I thought I'd lost you," and the two embrace. But no kiss yet. Now, first, the film has to reinforce that Ramon has definitely decided to leave his old life, and this is accomplished by a cut to a quick scene of the cotillion that Ramon won't be attending. And then, as Ramon and Moran gaze at each other, the crew returns and seems a bit embarrassed by it all. And finally, the film has to make sure the audience knows that finally Moran is now really a girl. So Moran's declaration that being a girl is a good thing is blunt and to the point. Now, once Moran declares that it's good to be a girl after all, then comes the long-awaited kiss, and the audience knows Moran and Ramon will sail off together. However, it doesn't happen that way in the novel. Now, the end of the novel is chapter 14, which is entitled The Ocean is Calling for You. And I have to admit that I was shocked when I read the ending. And I'm wagering that it would have made a great ending for a film. It was so exciting. However, the setup for the film, right from the beginning, was always headed towards a romantic, happy ending. But the novel has a totally different ending. It is absolutely exciting and just will bring you in. So, I'm not going to tell you what happened at the end. I'm going to give you one clue, though. Somebody dies. Who? That's the question. So I would suggest that you go to the blog, and I have it all laid out for you. You don't have to read the book, but you'll get a sense of what happened. And frankly, as I said, it would have been a great ending for a film. And actually, I think it would have afforded Rudolph Valentino and even Dorothy Dalton much greater challenges and interest in the roles they were playing. So check it out. I hope you enjoy it. And I have, of course, as usual, sourced everything and have notes. And you can find out, by the way, what Kitchell's full name was in the notes. So I hope you enjoyed this. This was a very hard thing to put together. I had computer issues all the way. So go check it out. I think you'll be pretty interested in what the novel did do in the end, how it finished off.